we can start. So thank you for taking the time to discuss with us about the fallout of the Panama Papers. And the first question that I have is, when you started the investigation, the Panama Papers, what was your expectation in terms of impact after publishing?
To be honest, my expectations were pretty low because after projects that I've been involved in, like the offshore leaks, the Swiss leaks and Luxembourg leaks, I have seen or observed many politicians speaking up and like raising their hands. Now we have to fight corruption. We have to fight for more transparency. But if you then looked at the results, they were pretty low. So my expectations were, when it comes to lawmakers, pretty low. But of course, when we investigated the Panama Papers, there were so many cases of obvious corruption, conflicts of interest, tax evasion, that I thought that there might be at least a little bit of a discussion in the public sphere, and that at least some investigators might be interested in our revelations. But what happened then overwhelmed me because it was so many. It was mass demonstrations in some countries. If you look to London, Iceland, Malta, those were some of the biggest demonstrations, at least in the case of Iceland, in the history of that country. We have so many lawmakers, members of parliament all around the world demanding change. And we had thousands of investigations launched all around the world. But again, we saw the same effect. We saw at the beginning warm words demanding change, but then pretty much soon things slowed down. But I think there's a long tail to all those investigations. If you look, for example, to the United States of America, one of the most notorious tax havens still around. They, at the beginning of this year, incorporated or put in effect the Corporate Accountability Act. I think that's the correct phrase. I have to look it up. Where they bring at least some more transparency to the field of US American companies. And they refer to the Panama Papers. So I think the Panama Papers caused an ongoing debate that is refreshed by each new revelation. Then were the Paradise Papers, the Pandora Papers, recently the Swiss secrets. And now I think we are in a crucial point in time because now we have the connection between this debate about transparency and a brutal war fought against a European country. We see governments and authorities all around the world trying to seize assets of oligarchs, and we see them failing again and again, and that is due to intransparency in this field. So I think this might really bring a little bit more change and might accelerate this progress because it's not a theoretical issue anymore. It's now like, hey, we want to stop a brutal war. We have some tools, but the tools don't work because there's so much intransparency out there.
And you talked about the some of the changes that Panama Papers made. What would be on your list the top three, let's say, or whatever you think of, changes and the top impact that this investigation had over the years?
I think the most important impact is the discussion. We are still debating shell companies, transparency, trusts and foundations, and it arrived in like a public sphere. Before it was basically a discussion within expert circles. Now you hear this discussion in by far broader circles. If you see here in Germany, even in like kids TV, you have discussions about shell companies, and I think that's good. That's important because we have to teach the youth, the older ones, everyone about the consequences of this intransparency. I think that is the most important thing. And I mean, the whole discussion arrived also like in pop culture. You see it in songs. If you watch the series Billions, they refer to the Panama Papers. If you saw that amazing Soderbergh movie about that is called The Laundromat, that is referring to the Panama Papers. So I think that is important because that tells me that this is not anymore an expert discussion. It's a broader discussion. But a little bit lower, I see changes when it comes to changes of law in regards to the registers of ultimate beneficial owners of companies. We had, at least here in Germany, some change. We have now a new register put in place after the Panama Papers. It is not working in a way that I would have hoped it worked, but it's a first step. And we see those steps in many, many other countries, also on the European Union level, and I think that is good. And now the most recent change in the United States, that is also important, I think, and should not be underestimated. That's a huge step that the US lawmakers, for the first time, in my opinion, really acknowledge that they are part of the problem. That is not enough for the United States, like pointing their fingers at other countries like Panama, but that they have to look and clean up their own backyard first to credibly being able to address other issues in other countries.
So in the Panama Papers, investigative journalists looked at offshore companies, and we are addressing the general public. So the question is, why are offshore companies bad? Why do we as the investigative reporters chase offshore companies and look at them and sometimes obsess about them?
Because offshore companies, and I use offshore companies here as a general term for trusts, foundations, shell companies, and whatever is out there, because they create a parallel world. We have the normal world where people on Main Street, you and me, are living, and then you have the parallel offshore world where the richest and super richest basically decide which laws they want to stick to and which ones not. This parallel world offers them a way to work around laws that have been passed by parliaments, by democratic elected parliaments. And those richest and super richest say, oh, that law, I don't like it. I find a loophole, and that loophole is basically the offshore world. And I think that is especially in these times that we are living in, where the whole world suffered a pandemic, and we still do not know how much the recovery will cost. We see a war in Europe unleashing. There will be lots of money needed. And that money is already there. But even governments don't know what is already hidden in the offshore world. So they can, for example, tax it. On the other hand side, the offshore world enables crooks and criminals to launder their money and to proceed with their criminal behavior. The offshore world also allows corrupt elites to plunder whole countries. And if we go on a more general level, if I'm living in Munich, which is, in my opinion, a country or a city in a country, Germany, where you cannot complain about bad living standards. But if you look around and see potholes in the streets, if you see still people who cannot afford university education, if you see elderly people who cannot afford their medical treatment, this is also a consequence of the parallel offshore world, because the money that would be needed to solve those problems is out there, but people are trying to keep it away from the taxman, to basically live their lavish lives, but keep it away from the public where it needs to be.
Okay, and the last question from your perspective, for the community of journalists all over the world, what did Panama Papers change? What was the big change that you have seen?
I think the Panama Papers mark a change in journalistic behavior. Before Panama Papers, the normal setting in a journalist or investigative journalist's mind was, I'm the lonely wolf. I cannot tell anyone about what I'm doing. I want my scoop. And as soon as I communicate with another journalist, my scoop will be gone. And there was groups like OCCRP and ICIJ starting to spread the idea like working together makes sense. But I think the Panama Papers showed it to everyone. Even the most critical editors in traditional newspapers or media outlets, I think, understood how much value was in a group of journalists, several hundred journalists teaming up together and investigating this treasure trove. And it also shows that nobody lost something by sharing information or by sharing data. Everyone won. And I think the one institution that won most is society in general. And I think that's the important signal. So I think the Panama Papers have marked the beginning of a new era in investigative journalists, where journalists team up across borders, where German journalists team up with Romanian journalists to solve problems when they are cross-border. And we have to face reality. We are living in a globalized world. There is no German problem. There is no Romanian problem. There's always a connection to other countries. So it's only logical that journalists team up and solve those problems with journalists from those countries together.
Cool. Thank you.